what we'll do next week.
Okay.
This week we got to get through this content, and then next week, every day we got to study. Okay. All right. So we are, that little side part of your notes is for you. All right, what we're getting ready to talk about. I'm going to go briefly over all these. We'll kind of scroll through them later. But this is what we're working on for the next couple of days. Yeah, I can't reach. I don't know if I spelled that right. All right. So, did I spell communism right?
No. There's no N somewhere.
There we go. Okay. I cannot spell, so fix whatever in your own notes. All right. So, here's what this last period 8, 1945 to 1980. It is these 3 C's. Cold War. The purpose of the Cold War is containment of what? Communism. So that's what we're looking at. Everything about from 1940 to 1980 is about the containment of communism. Okay? The idea of, let me get his name spelled right. I wish his name started with a C. It kind of does. Hard K. This is our guy. Okay? So after World War II, and we set everything up, we're going to talk about that in depth. The policy of the United States becomes, we cannot stop communism. It is impossible to stop. So our goal now is to contain communism where it's at. And in 1945, communism was the Soviet Union. That was it. That's it. That's all we got. So Keenan said, if we keep communism there, then we're good. And we won't have any issues. We'll just stop it. How are we going to stop it? So that's the part where we're at. So if we look at our notes, key points, containment was foreign policy plan utilized by the United States to contain or block Soviet aggression or expansion. Containment was the foreign policy of Truman. So this is where we're going to go next. And I like these things, but I don't know if you guys do. Okay, so now we're building, right? We started with the Monroe Doctrine that said, stay out of our hemisphere, right? And the rest of the world did what? Ha, 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 laughed at us, right? You can't tell us that. Then we moved to the Roosevelt Corollary, which I'm sure I spelled that wrong as well. Roosevelt Corollary said, this is our hemisphere and we're going to protect it. This is the walk softly, carry a big stick, where we become the policemen of the world. And then what we get next will be the Truman Doctrine. And the Truman Doctrine, I think is on the next page. Truman Doctrine is on the next page. President Truman was determined to block the expansion of Soviet Union into Greece and Turkey. Truman asked Congress for money, right? So this was about protection. This was big stick, like look out for us. This is just paper. This is big money. We are going to give you money. So when we ask, or when we think about the Cold War, containment, and communism, how are we going to try to do that with money? Let me add this up here. That makes this Cold War even worse. That's what makes Cold War worse, right? This is what makes the Cold War worse than anything else, is that we have atomic and nuclear bombs. We have the capability of total destruction of the entire world, okay? So I am on that next page under the Truman Doctrine. Truman justified the aid by declaring that the United States would support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. I would write by those, that outside pressure is communism. So if there are any nations that are trying to keep themselves from becoming a communist country, we will give you money. So the policy of the United States has become a monetary policy. We are going to throw all kinds of money at you people. And if you take our money, we will help you become a true democratic nation. So this is the story of my life, right? Even though I'm not born, obviously, in 1945. But when I was born in 1964, my dad was in Turkey, right? So the first place he's going is Greece and Turkey. We set up Air Force bases and Army bases and Navy bases in Turkey specifically as that one country to keep the Soviet aggression out. So when I'm born, my dad's in Turkey. My dad's there probably until I'm almost, I think I was probably, I don't obviously remember, but I think my mom said I was almost like 9, 10 months before my dad rotated back. So this is the height of, again, all of this movement of money and our military, these military bases. So now we're going to kind of go backtracking to 1945. And what is that money? The Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan at the bottom of that, whatever that page number is, World War I left Eastern Europe devastated, vulnerable, right? So this is what we are saying that's not going to happen again. We are not going to leave Europe. And when I say we, we're talking about the United States. Marshall Plan was a program of massive economic aid designed to promote the recovery of war-torn Europe and please, under that D, Marshall Plan, at the same time, prevent communism. Underline, 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 okay? So this is the classic. Does the federal government ever give money away just because they want to give money away? The answer is always no. You're getting a kind of sort of free public education because we want you to grow up, get good jobs, and pay taxes. We provide foreign aid to other countries in the 21st century for a different reason. But in 1945, we are giving aid to these countries, lots of it, to prevent them from becoming communist. In 1945, we still have, my mom is about to be born, my mom's born in 1946, in a house with no electricity, no indoor plumbing in rural North Carolina. And I'm sure many of you have those same stories. We're about to spend a whole lot of money in Europe to give people all these things that a whole lot of our people in the United States don't have already. That's going to be what's going to hit in the 1960s. It takes us about 20 years to say, wait a second, how is this helping us to build all this up in another country when we still have such horrific poor people? That's what African Americans are going to say. That's what poor rural people are going to say. All right? But it is important. Please understand, this is what saves the world. The Marshall Plan saves our planet, even though I'm poo-pawing it on the other side. This is, for the 20th century, probably one of the most single important events, money spent to prevent total annihilation of the world. Total annihilation. All right, so we got that. Next, Marshall's Plan was effective in both of its goals. This is 1,000% check plus effective. It saves Europe. It saves the Western world. Marshall Plan effective in both of its goals. Western economies recovered, communism made very few inroads, hardly any at all. In the meantime, containment, let's go from containment. Put this one down. Yeah, I'll put this one. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This is an alliance that starts with 10 countries. What's at? It's page 115. I finally found my page numbers at the bottom. I'm on page 115E, the NATO alliance. This NATO alliance has carried again the free democratic world into the 21st century. I should have looked this up. I don't know how many are in NATO now. I think it's 20 plus countries. A lot of countries that, for people that grew up in the Cold War, that's really scary. Countries like Poland, Poland was part of the Warsaw Pact. So in the 21st century, we actually have people and nations that are part of NATO that were originally part of the Warsaw Pact, which was communism. So NATO alliance marked a divisive break from America's tradition of isolationism. So this is also key. That again is another lesson that we learned from World War I. We cannot isolate ourselves. We can't isolate ourselves economically. We certainly cannot isolate ourselves politically. And when we do, again, it will bring about devastating consequences when we do that. The NATO alliance marked a decisive break established by Washington and Jefferson of avoiding entangling alliances. So we finally end that in 1945 with NATO. Lots of countries, again, will seek admittance into NATO. President Biden is about to do something that we avoided for many, many years with an alliance leader of Turkey, because Turkey is one of those weird countries that is Islamic, but it is dealt with as a secular nation, so they don't use the Quran as their governance. It's also a border with the Soviet Union, so we really needed Turkey. So what we did as a country is we avoided the fact that they committed genocide on Armenians. They killed almost 6 to 7 million, 1 to 2 million Armenians at the end of World War I. And the United States and many other countries, in the bid to do all this, ignored the genocide and didn't recognize the genocide. Because of the place where we're at now, President Biden is going to do that with the president of Turkey. We'll see how that all goes down, because it has been a very, very sore point. Turkey said they did not do it. The entire world says you did. Here's the pictures. If any of you are interested, there will be a lot of information out about that, probably in the next couple of days. But this is what we need. We need people on our side to create this alliance called NATO, North Atlantic. All right. Does everybody have all that? Because I'm getting ready to erase all that. Got it? Does it make sense? Probably not, but hopefully it's all there. Okay, so the first challenge that we're going to have is to all of this policy, right? So this is great policy on paper. This is awesome policy on paper, but when it comes to actually, does this work? Our first test is going to be Berlin. So at the end of World War II, Germany is devastated politically, it's devastated economically, and its infrastructure, buildings, everything is destroyed. So we take the country of Germany and we divide it into fours. So I am on page 115 if you want to draw this beside the part where it makes sense. Now, I don't know if I have this right in the way that it's played out. But just roll with me. Okay, so this is Germany. At the last conference in Yalta, the powers that be said, there's no way that we can return Germany back the way it is, because what will happen is somebody like Hitler will rise up again. That is how Hitler came to power. Germany was devastated. You get this one person that says they're going to fix everything. People log on to that. So the powers that be know we cannot do that again. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to divide Germany up into quadrants or sectors. And each country is responsible for rebuilding. Economically, politically, free elections. Okay, so this is what each one of these quadrants have to do. Each country is responsible for rebuilding. So that means really rebuilding roads, buildings. So you have to put money into it. Political structures. So build back the political structures. The small town mayor, the gosh, what do they call it? Can't remember what we call. Oh, the Stadts. Each of what we would call a state, a Stadt. Each one of those, and then eventually moving on to free elections. And the goal is, in a certain date, which I can't ever remember, I don't know what it is, we are all going to, whatever it is, it happens in 1948, we're all going to hand the keys back to Germany and let them have their country rebuilt with free democratic political infrastructures and free elections. That's what we're all going to do. And in Yalta, everybody agrees. Everyone agrees. Except this guy. So, in 1948, everyone agrees it's time to hand the keys back. So France hands their keys back. The United States hands their keys back. The Soviet Union hands their keys back. And also in Berlin. So Berlin is the capital. Everyone took a part of Berlin because you need to have a central capital. And so everyone took a part of Berlin and gave it back, except the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union said, we're going to keep this. Why does the Soviet Union want to keep this? It has resources. Coal, industry, and smart German people. Those smart German people are really important. My AP Euro kids, remember the first people that provided free public education in Europe were the Germans, right? So these people are highly educated. So what happens overnight is there is a wall built. It's called the Berlin Wall. Hopefully you've heard of it. And instantaneously, all of these people are stuck behind the Soviet sector and interior into the Soviet Union's sector that now becomes East Germany. They can't get out. They can't move. The Soviets turn off all the power, turn off all the water, and these people are stuck. So when we think about it, think about things very simple, like medication. No medication. No food. These people are stuck. It's mostly the United States because for some reason France got word a little bit earlier. But most of these people are of the United States. So President Truman orders a massive airlift, a giant airlift of B-52 bombers that will provide food, fuel, and other supplies to the beleaguered citizens of West Berlin. At its high point, there's over 100 B-52s landing in this strip. Has anyone ever seen a B-52 before? B-52, they're called flying fortresses. Have you ever seen one, Finn? They're enormous. I can't even describe. It doesn't even look like these planes would ever get up off the air, but their cargo bay are enormous. I mean, I don't think I would be over-exaggerating, like they're almost the length of this hallway. They're gigantic planes, constantly going in, resupplying things. Again, this is another point where we get really close to war with the Soviet Union. Eventually, what happens is the Soviets have to back down. The wall stays up, but what we get is this thing right here, known as Checkpoint Charlie. And this becomes the entrance into West Berlin. This is East Berlin. This is a hotbed of spy activity until we end the Cold War. My best friend, when we lived in West Germany, her dad was Secret Forces, and he would just disappear, not know where he was, and we would make a whole lot of big fun of it, and her dad would get really, really mad at us because he would pretend like maybe sometimes the house was bugged that they lived in. So we would like talk into the salt shakers, and I'd say, Jana, is your dad home this weekend? She'd say, no, he left with his deploy kit. Don't know where he's going. And her dad would get really angry, but because he probably was doing some bad stuff. I don't know what. But this becomes Checkpoint Charlie. This is the first step. This is really stage one of escalation of the Cold War. So this escalation of the Cold War begins, and what happens this time is the Soviets back down. Because why do we need someone to always back down? Atomic and nuclear bombs. That's what the Cold War is. The Cold War is the issue the Cold War is a fight between the United States and democracy and the Soviet Union and communism. And thankfully, never ever did the two actually engage in battle because we would have exploded the planet. What we do is we use different groups of people to fight out these battles for us. This is really number one, the closest that we come. And then the second one will be under JFK, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That will become step two. So now we go back and we're going to add another, and I'm going to sit down for this one because I don't have anything to write for this one. So the next one we're going to do is the fall of China. And this is gigantic. This is huge, tremendous explosion of communism. And it is the failure. So when we look at perhaps to what extent did the United States keep communism out of the Cold War, this is utter failure. This is gigantic failure. Led by Mao Zedong, the Chinese communists defeat the Chinese nationalists and become a communist nation. On the next page, the collapse of nationalist China was viewed as a devastating defeat for the United States and its Cold War allies. The fall of China And that's what we call it. Obviously, in Chinese history, it would not be considered a fall. It would be considered a great day. The United States refused to recognize the new government in Beijing. We do not recognize Mao Zedong or China as a country. It's kind of like you're 3 and you close your eyes. Nah, you don't exist. Nah, nah, nah. We're going to try that for a while. The United States interpreted the Chinese Revolution as a part of a menacing communist monolith under Moscow. And the last bullet point under 2, I would put a big box around. The fall of China contributed to anti-communist hysteria in the United States. We go bat crap crazy about communism. This is when Arthur Miller writes The Crucible. This is going to be our next gigantic Red Scare that puts that 1921's pales in comparison. Pales in comparison. The next little bit that we're going to look at is the Korean War. It is a war, again, that is actually really a conflict because it really isn't necessarily, we didn't declare war. This is, again, about communism. Korea is being, again, I don't want to say invaded because the Soviets are supplying North Koreans with weapons. South Koreans are fighting against that. So the Korean War begins when North Korea invades South Korea in 1950. So 5 years after the end of World War II, we're engaged in the Korean War again, or we're engaged in war again in Korea. President Truman took advantage of a temporary Soviet absence from the United Security Council to obtain a unanimous condemnation of North Korea as an aggressor. The Korean War thus marked the first collective military action by the United Nations. I would highlight that because this is, again, the purpose and the fear that Cabot Lodge had after World War I, that there's going to be all these other things that we're going to get drug into. It's important to note that the Korean War was fought under UN auspices, with 90% of the troops being American. 90%, which means 10% came from other countries, but we supply the most. It's a very limited war. Korean War was limited that it extended the containment policy to Asia. Truman's going to fire MacArthur under that. On page 117, General MacArthur disagreed with Truman's policy of fighting. Eventually, we sign an armistice in 1953. An armistice means we just stopped fighting. In reality, the war has never ended. Monday, April 26, 2021, the war is still not ended in Korea. We don't fight anymore, but it's not ended. Big, giant box around 5. Giant box around 5. Truman's integration of the armed forces happens in the Korean War. Prior to the Korean War, African Americans fought in segregated units. President Truman ordered a racial desegregation of the armed forces. The Korean War marked the first time the United States had fought in integrated units. So this is step 1. Remember, the federal government has the ability to do these things because they control that part of the population. They can't make everybody do it yet. And that will be the part that we will be looking at. All right, so next part in our Cold War step is Vietnam. So, Vietnam is an Asian country. This is the first memories of my life, and it takes up a gigantic chunk of my life, Vietnam War. My dad was stationed in Okinawa starting in 1968. Vietnam really starts in 1946. You need to know that it was a French colony, and the French just leave. So following World War I, the United States adopted a policy following World War II of containment. And on the top of page 118, the French withdrawal. So the French are going to leave Vietnam. And as soon as the French leave Vietnam, if you look under 2, Ho Chi Minh who is a communist, is going to sweep into Vietnam in 1954. The United States is not going to accept that, and we begin a look at the Vietnam War. Let's skip. Okay, so we'll get to the war in a second. They have it out of order. All right, key Cold War events. We're going to speed this up. So for any of you that are sitting there about to hyperventilate because you have another trig quiz, how many would that be? A lot of you. Here's who you can thank. Communist. It's a pinko commie thing. It truly is. Here's what happens. It's this lovely thing called the space race. Prior to 1957, if you graduated from Sullivan High School in 1950, you probably were only required to take algebra and biology to graduate. The rest of your schedule would have been filled up with history courses, English courses, speech courses, lots of, if you remember from world history, that Greek liberal arts foundation. No science, no math. If you have family members that graduated in the 1950s, I doubt seriously they took chemistry. Pretty certain they didn't. Biology, algebra, maybe algebra 2, maybe geometry, but that was it. Here's what changed. We are in a race, in this Cold War race, with the Soviets, and they get to space before we do, with Sputnik. Sputnik is an important name. It is a satellite. There are no people in Sputnik. It's just a satellite like what we have now. But they beat us in 1957, and it shook the core of the United States. How does democracy not win? How does this not happen? And we can talk about how that happens in the Soviet Union when they can use money for other things. But Sputnik stunned the United States, prompting Eisenhower to establish NASA. It also, please look at the top of page 119, Sputnik made education an issue of national security by passing the National Defense Education Act, which significantly expanded federal aid to education by funding programs in math, foreign languages, guess which one? Russian, and science. So we're like, holy cow, they beat us. I like to think that they beat us because they started educating their women in math and science way back in 1917. That was an interesting picture. If we look at a picture, I don't know what the Soviets called their NASA program. I'm just going to say cosmonautans. I don't know what they call them. But if we look at a picture of the people that worked on Sputnik, it is a wide variety of genders. And they aren't just the ones holding cups of coffee. If we look at pictures of NASA in 1963-ish, when we start, it's a whole bunch of men. And if the women are there, they're on the sides getting the coffee and typing papers, except for Hidden Figures. And why were they called Hidden Figures? Because they were hidden. So, Sputnik is why you're taking a trig test today. Because So you can take great control of that. All right, our last thing we're going to end with, Egypt seized the Suez Canal. Castro is going to take Cuba. Please write Castro in Cuba. That's communist. Again, we're going to go crazy because how close is Cuba to the United States? And the Soviets are going to shoot down a spy plane, a U-2 spy plane. And in that spy plane is a gentleman named Gary Powers, who is going to be tortured, made to say all kinds of things.
I need to call Mr. O'Brien a communist when I get into his class.
You can call him a pinko commie.
Also, I found my sticker chart. I think you owed me a sticker.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Did I owe you a test sticker? Yes.
Double sign.
I knew that communists had to somehow.
I do. Go open that and look where everybody usually gets the. Yep.
And it wasn't that much.
Sine is sine cosine cosine. I know, but there's
I don't know. I actually think I'm gonna do good on this
yeah,
one.
because I'm thinking sine thing. They're building an sine thing.
Sine, cosine.
Yes. And then the tan thing, there's something.
Listen to this. The tan's all I remember. You know, the top stays the same, the bottom is different.
Yeah.
You just need one?
Yeah.
All right, don't forget, you have homework. I will be collecting it first thing in the morning. It should not look like anyone else's.
Okay, I don't understand 3C.
What?
From the notes. Oh no, then.
Oh, you're talking about.
My practice test graded by tomorrow.
Oh, yes, sure. I might even have it graded by the end of the day.
There's not anything like that.
There shouldn't be.
Yeah. Okay. That was the
The only type of
Oh, I was like,
like cosine, cosine, cosine,